So we've been in the book of Genesis for a little while now, and today we're going to be looking at a story in Genesis 16. It is a difficult story. One of my favorite biblical scholars, Tim Mackey, commenting on Genesis 16, says this: "This story makes us feel gross. There are times when the biblical story wants to give an honest and raw look into human nature, and that's not a bad thing. It's just uncomfortable." Some of you are like, that's not what I signed up for today, but it's the reality. As we go through the Bible, there's stories that are uncomfortable. The Bible has a lot of stories. It has narrative, and the Bible has these stories that are positive and then stories that are negative, okay? Personally, I love the positive stories. I love reading about Daniel while he's in exile in Babylon, and he's faithful, and we go, yay, Daniel, and it's an encouragement, be like Daniel. I love reading the stories about Queen Esther, who stands up for her people and speaks truth to power. We go, yes, God, give me that type of courage. But then there's a lot of negative stories in the Bible. Stories that, honestly, if you don't know much about the Bible, you read them and you're very confused because you're like, wait, am I supposed to be like this? The answer is no. Negative stories in the Bible serve as an opportunity to warn us, to show us this is what could happen to you if you do what they did. And today is one of those passages. I remember hearing a psychologist one time say that we humans are often more motivated by negative emotion than positive emotion. I love positive emotion, but occasionally negative emotion is more helpful. An example is stretching. I think all of us would agree that physically stretching is a good idea. I could send you an article that says, here's 5 benefits to stretching if you stretch daily. Improves the blood flow, helps prevent you from injuries, all these types of things. You could read that and go, cool, and then still never stretch. I will never forget, as an 18-year-old sitting in my philosophy class, when my 70-year-old professor limped in. She said, I am in so much physical pain today. And my doctor told me that if I would have just stretched for about 5 minutes a day, it would have prevented so much of the pain I'm experiencing. She goes, please listen, stretch every day. I stretch every day for at least 5 minutes. Well, not because I read an article on the benefits of it, but because I was scared into it. I was like, I don't want that to be my reality. And so she scared me. The negative emotion of that might be my reality when I'm 70, to be in that much physical pain with something that could be prevented. And again, obviously you could stretch every day and still be in that much pain. Awful things still happen. But if I could prevent unnecessary suffering and not experience that, sign me up. And so today, as we dive into the story, we're going to see a negative example, and there's going to be some negative emotion in you. And all I'm asking you is, will you hear the alarm? Will you hear the warning sign to your soul and go, I don't want to do that. I want my life trajectory to look different than that. So if you have a Bible, run over to Genesis chapter 16. I'm going to read Genesis 16, the whole chapter. There's only 16 verses, so it's not too long. It is narrative. You're going to have questions, and that's a good thing. But I'm going to read through the whole story, and then I'll begin addressing some stuff. But I don't want to break it up and just let us take it in and feel some of the weightiness to this story. Genesis 16, verse 1. If you got a Bible, great. If not, it'll be up here on the screen. Abram's wife, Sarai, had not borne any children for him, but she owned an Egyptian slave named Hagar. Sarai said to Abram, since the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, go to my slave. Perhaps through her I can build a family. And Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So Abram's wife, Sarai, took Hagar, her Egyptian slave, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife for him. This happened after Abram had lived in the land of Canaan 10 years. He slept with Hagar, and she became pregnant. When she saw that she was pregnant, her mistress became contemptible to her. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for my suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and when she saw that she was pregnant, I became contemptible to her. May the Lord judge between me and you." Abram replied to Sarai, "Here, your slave's in your hands. Do whatever you want with her." Then Sarai mistreated her so much that she ran away from her. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. He said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" She replied, "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her authority." The angel of the Lord said to her, "I will greatly multiply your offspring, and they will be too many to count." The angel of the Lord said to her, "You have conceived and will have a son. You will name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your cry of affliction. This man will be like a wild donkey. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him. He will settle near all his relatives." So she named the Lord who spoke to her, "You are El Roi," for she said, "In this place have I actually seen the one who sees me?" That is why the well is called Be'er Yahe Roi. It is between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar gave birth to Abram's son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to him. Whoa. I usually look at the passage Monday morning for that upcoming Sunday. And when I read this past Monday, I've read this, I know this story, but I picked it and I'm like, okay, here we go. I just knew this was going to be a heavier Sunday. I think it's okay for that to be the case. Like, we can't every Sunday be rah, rah, yay, yay. There have to be some Sundays where we just sit under the Word and sit in the weightiness of what's going on, in the brokenness of the Scriptures, and the brokenness of our world, the brokenness of humanity, the story told in the Scriptures where we just go, Jesus, help us. Now, this story has a lot of things where if you're reading it, you should probably put a little question mark next to some things, right? Like things that are kind of confusing and things that are difficult and things that kind of act as like, I don't know what to do with that. Unfortunately, a lot of Christians just read a chapter like Genesis 16 and then they just turn the page. They're like, oh, that was rough. What I always beg you to do is to dive into the things that bother you. Figure out what is it about this that God might want to do in me and through me. And so as I read this on Monday, I can't help but see that word slave in the first verse and go, ugh. Everything in me would love to get up here and preach Genesis 16 and not read the whole thing, but just read like maybe the end where she sees God and says, "You are the God who sees me." And I'd be like, "God sees you, amen, woohoo." Like, I'd love to do that. But we have to address hard things. And so I want to spend just a few minutes. It's not the main point of the story at all. But it's significant enough, and for many of us, if not all of us, it raises such issues for us that we're like, what do we do with this? So I want to talk about slavery in the Bible for just a few minutes. Sometimes I wish I was like a pastor 20 years ago, before the internet, 30 years ago, whenever the internet wasn't a thing. In some ways it'd be easier, and in other ways, I'm sure it had its own challenges. But the internet has kind of created this reality that people are on social media and they're exposed to a lot more things. So I get texts or emails at least weekly of like, "Hey Brad, have you seen this TikTok video? This 16-year-old demolishes Christianity with this argument against slavery in the Bible." I'm like, okay. They're like, help me, my faith is on the line. I'm like, okay, relax. Christianity's going to be okay. But this is, we see stuff all the time on social media. It's like, oh, what do we do? So I want to, and we have to talk about this. So I want to talk about slavery. I want to just say a few things. I'm not going to answer every question. If you're interested, if you like the Old Testament is challenging to you, which if you've read it, it will be challenging to you. This book is phenomenal. It's called Is God a Moral Monster by Paul Copan. Is God a Moral Monster by Paul Copan. Highly recommend it if you have questions and you're like, the laws and all this stuff. But let me say just a few things about slavery in the Bible. Here's the most important thing. God hates slavery. Okay? You have to start there. God hates slavery. Remember, when we read stories like this, it does not mean God approves of everything going on. Most of the Old Testament men were polygamous and had multiple wives. God never once says that's a good thing. He shows us what his intention is in Eden, Genesis 1 and 2, a husband and a wife. He goes, this is my desire for the world. And then in Genesis 3, humans go, never mind, we'll do it better our way. And they try, and they do tons of things. And not every single passage does a husband take multiple wives and God goes, bad, 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 bad. He's already said it was bad. So there's passages that talk about slavery, and there's other things that God doesn't necessarily pinpoint and go, this is bad. So let me just give you one example, though. In Exodus, the very next book of the Bible, where God is giving the laws to Israel, Exodus chapter 21, verse 16 says this. This is one of God's commands. Whoever kidnaps a person must be put to death, whether he sells him or the person is found in his possession. Okay? So now some of us are even more angry. We're like, God put people to death. It's like, God's serious about this. You're like, I didn't like slavery. Like, God hates it. So much so that in the Old Testament, if you stole someone, you enslaved someone, you stole someone, God goes, that's the death penalty. Okay? So God hates it. It's sin in 1 Timothy. It's sin throughout the Bible. Enslaving people, trading slaves. It is important to address the fact that when we hear the word slave or the word slavery in America, our minds understandably go back to our history as a country where white people kidnapped, stole, abused, and used black men, women, and children. So when we hear slavery, we think of that. I'm actually reading a book called The Demon of Unrest right now by Eric Larson. It's a history book. It's tremendous. He's one of my favorite historians. And it's all about the Civil War and the North and the South and slavery and all of that. And so when we see slavery in the Bible, we go, that's what it's talking about. But it's not. Now, I'm not pretending slavery in the Bible was a good thing and everything was happy. I'm not at all saying that. Slavery it's bad, always. But slavery in the Bible was not based on skin color. It was not based on your race. Now, this is different because in the Bible, in the biblical times, we, like if transport 3,000, 4,000 years ago, if you had your crops and there was a famine or locust ate all your crops, you're not eating, okay? There was no government assistance. There was no filing for bankruptcy. There were no credit cards. If you're like, I'm just going to get some cheeseburger, throw it on the card, I'll pay that off later. No, you don't have food, you're not eating. So a common practice in all of history, especially in biblical times, was you would, if you were out of money, out of food, you would sell yourself into slavery to a family who had more money and could provide for you financially by giving you food, shelter, and water, and you were their slave, okay? So again, not saying it was nice and they were very nice slave masters. No. It's still rough and awful, but it's different, and that's important for us to understand. Here's the last thing I'll say about slavery. The Bible does not go as far as you or I would like it to in completely prohibiting slavery in every instance. It just doesn't. This makes me uncomfortable. It should make you uncomfortable. So what do we do with this reality? We have to understand the Bible as a story. It's a true story where God in Genesis 1 and 2 sets the stage of this is what I want for my world. okay? If you miss Genesis 1 and 2, you've missed the whole Bible. Genesis 1 and 2, God goes, this is what I want for my whole world. Genesis 3, humans go, we'll do it our own way. And they mess everything up. So here's an example. There are, God does not like divorce, okay? Genesis 1 and 2, we see this. Marriage, husband and one wife. Is there divorce in the Garden of Eden? No. But then in the Old Testament and the New Testament, there are regulations around divorce. It's like God says, hey, don't get divorced. That's his plan. But humans jack up the world, and then there are men and women in such horrific marriage circumstances that God goes, okay, for some instances, you can get divorced for this. Okay? Jesus himself says in the Gospels. So now we shouldn't go to the Gospel and say, Jesus is for divorce. He's pro-divorce. Jesus is not pro-divorce. He's pro-healthy marriages, but he knows that there's violence and abuse and things that take place and adultery, things that take place that can destroy a marriage. And he goes, therefore, here are some regulations around your sin in the midst of a broken world, okay? Esau Macaulay is a brilliant New Testament scholar at Wheaton in Illinois. He wrote a tremendous book called Reading While Black. The subtitle is African American Biblical Interpretation as an Exercise in Hope. He has a whole chapter on slavery, and he says this in his book. On the first read, the Bible does not appear to say all that we want it to say in the way that we want the Bible to say it. And yet, this is the crucial part. The Bible says more than enough. The story of Christianity does not on every page legislate slavery out of existence. Nonetheless, the Christian narrative, our core theological principles, and our ethical imperatives create a world in which slavery becomes unimaginable. Read history. Who was on the front line as abolitionists destroying slavery? It was Christians. Were some Christians using the Bible to continue to have slaves? Yes. They, in fact, created a slave Bible where they had to rip out a ton of pages in the Bible in order to support their understanding that God wanted slavery. And so you can misuse the Bible, absolutely. Here's the last thing I'll say with this. When we read the Old Testament and there's things that are difficult for us, we do have to understand that God is meeting a broken, sinful people, and as best he can, going, okay, here was my vision. You already ruined that. Here is my vision of the new creation. As we're moving toward that, here are some regulations around things. Okay? Now here's the best illustration I've got to help put this practically in our minds. Years ago, I was having lunch with a friend. He and his wife are foster parents, and they had a foster boy with them who was 12 years old. This boy who had come into their home had a horrific background. He had a horrific background of abuse, of neglect, everything you can imagine, he had experienced it. When they had him in their home, the first time he got angry, what he did was go to the wall and begin banging his head on the wall constantly. The only way they could prevent him from doing that was physically restraining him. That was it. But the moment they let him go, he went back to the wall, just banging his head. That's how he dealt with his difficult emotions. They were overwhelmed. They talked to the social worker. They're trying to figure everything out. And he said, we've come up with a plan. The plan, he would do this 100 times a day. The plan is we let him bang his head on the wall 5 times a day. He said, and it's working. When we said 0, he had no concept that was a possibility, so he just did whatever. But we've given him a limit of banging his head on the wall 5 times, and he actually counts, and it gets to 5, and then he knows he's done. Okay? Now here's where the story's going. Imagine you went to his house. You didn't know any of this story. You go to his house one night for dinner. Okay? And I'm not trying to be funny here, but you go to his house for dinner, and his son starts to get angry at the dinner table. And the dad goes, hey buddy, go hit your head on the wall 5 times. You would go, what? Like, should I call the police? This guy sounds like the worst father ever. You don't know that yesterday he was banging his head 500 times against the wall. And eventually it got down to 0 times because the Father's meeting the Son where he's at and moving toward health. Okay? So does that explain everything? And now we read passages in the Old Testament and go, yay! No, it's still hard. It's still stuff I wrestle with. It's still reasons why I have to read books and go, help me understand this. But we need to understand a little bit of what is going on. Okay, so that was quite a bit. I keep saying the last thing, but whenever I'm struggling as a Christian with the Bible, here's what I also do. And I think I mentioned this last Sunday. I always go, what are my alternatives? Okay? Whenever I'm arguing with an atheist, oftentimes I'll argue with atheists about this. And they'll be like, oh, the Bible condones slavery. And I'm like, okay, first of all, okay, let's just chat. As an atheist, you have no moral grounds to say slavery is wrong. Okay? If there's no God, all you are is evolved matter, you and I are the same equivalency to primates. How does the animal kingdom operate? The strong dominate the weak. Period. You see a lion destroy a gazelle out on the African safari. Does anyone go, arrest the lion? He's being mean. No, the lion gets to do whatever he wants to do because he's stronger than the gazelle. If there's no God, that's you and I, and the strong win. There is a God who says that's evil and wicked, and there will be judgment on all those who operate according to that way. Okay? So, anyways, let's get back to Genesis 16. I could make that a whole series. In Genesis 16, if you rewind a little bit, if you're brand new, this may all be like, what is happening? In Genesis 12, God comes to Abram and says, hey, even though you're older, I am going to bless you. You are going to have so many children that you are going to be a great nation. I will bless you and you will be a blessing to the nations. Abram's like, epic. And then 10 years go by, okay? If God makes a promise to me, I'm frustrated 10 seconds later. He's gone 10 years. And Abram and Sarai are struggling to believe God told us this, but it's not happening. What do? They take things into their own hands, okay? And what we see, which is deeply applicable for all of us, is when we do not trust and obey God, we force solutions that harm people and ultimately add unnecessary suffering in our own lives. This is what Abram and Sarai experience. They don't trust God, they don't obey him, so they take things into their own hands, and as they do that, they try to force a solution. In the process of forcing a solution, they hurt people. And not only do they hurt people, they add unnecessary suffering to themselves. So I want to unpack what that looks like for us when we don't trust and obey God. It is very important to understand that trusting and obedience in the Bible is interlinked. Like when God says, trust me, he's saying, obey me. You and I don't get to say, oh, I trust God so much, and then we walk in disobedience. He goes, no, I know that you trust me by the way you obey me. Abram and Sarai don't get to go, God, we trust you so much, we're just going to have a baby through another woman. He goes, no, you don't trust me, you don't obey me. That's the reality, right? I mean, parents in the room, if your kids are like, we trust you, we just disobey you. It's like, you don't trust me. Like that's the reality. So they force this solution. And it goes really, really south. I remember 6 or so years ago, I was at a pastor's prayer meeting, and it was in the San Fernando Valley, and there were, a couple dozen pastors. And before we began praying, one of the pastors threw out a question to talk about, and the question was, hey, in your years of ministry experience, if you had to give another pastor one bit of wisdom, like one line of wisdom, what would it be? And I'm a young guy. I'm taking notes. Like, hey, some of these guys have been pastoring longer than I've been alive. I'm like, come on, let's go. I remember this one pastor, guy I respect, Lynn Corey. He'd been pastoring a few decades. And he said, here it is. Never force anything. And I was like, never force anything. That resonated deeply with my soul. Anyone ever gotten into trouble because they tried to force a situation? Anyone have deep regrets over a season of life where you're like, I should probably wait, but I just need to make things happen? This is what Abram and Sarai do. God says, I'm going to give you a child. And they're like, it's not working. Let's force things our own way. And it doesn't go well. You and I do this all the time. Instead of waiting on God, we manufacture things. Now, this is difficult, and the Bible is paradoxical in the sense that I could very much next week preach a whole sermon on perseverance and long-suffering. It's hard. Keep going. Keep going. Okay? The Bible's got everything in there. But today, what we're focusing on is wait on the Lord. Wait on Him. Wait on Him. I think of so many times in my life where I've tried to force things and it goes south. When my wife and we got married, the month I turned 22, and we were at a church. I was working on staff at a church, and things were. It was a challenging situation where I was at, and it probably could have been dealt with just more maturity on my end and some hard conversations, but I didn't do that. And I had a friend who called me in a different city, and he said, "Hey, we're hiring a high school pastor. You want to be the guy?" I was like, "Done." God's obviously God's in that. So we jumped. We left the church, went to a new church. We said yes to a church that we had never even visited. It's a good idea, real good idea. After the first Sunday, my wife and I looked at each other like, this might have been a mistake. It's just great church, nice people, but this is not what we're supposed to be doing. But we just moved as newlyweds into a new community, said yes, taking on a new ministry with a bunch of high schoolers, volunteers, staff team I'm leading, all of it. And within weeks, I'm going, we shouldn't have done this. A little while later, my buddy Andy Rogers calls. He says, hey, we're going to plant a church in San Diego. And I was like, that's what we should have waited for. But here we are. We forced ourselves into a solution. Did we pray about it? You know, the way you do. Lord, give us wisdom. Amen. There's no fasting. There's no processing in community. In fact, one person I processed the decision with, he was like, that's not a good decision. I was like, thank you. He must not be hearing from the Lord. And we did it. Like we do this all the time. Consumer debt? Is that not the epitome of forcing something? God's like, hey, how's your bank account? You're like, I don't know, but that jacket looks real nice. I don't have the means to do it, but I want it. I need it. I can't wait. And we jump in. We force things constantly. But not only do we force things, we hurt people. Look at verse 2 and 3. Sarai said to Abram, since the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, okay, in those seasons we begin not only doubting, but blaming. This is God's fault. Go to my slave, perhaps through her I can build a family. And Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So Abram's wife took Hagar. This is the same language as Genesis 3, where they take the fruit. There's some overlaps between Genesis 3 and the garden and Genesis 16. It's beautiful but terrifying. Instead of fruit, taking Hagar, her Egyptian slave, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife for him. So when they're in the process of needing to force a solution, what do? They use people. This is what we do. When we're waiting on the Lord, we're able to see people as image bearers of God. When we're in a hurry and we need to make things happen, they become means to an end for us. Oh, we need a baby? Take the slave. That'll work. We're talking about sexual exploitation. I think about the story when we took this job. I say we, I want to make it my wife's fault too. But we did it together. How did we hurt people? Well, we hurt people because we dove into a commitment that we shouldn't have dove into. Like high school meant high school students. To have a constant new leader all the time is not good for their soul. It's hard. It takes time for them to develop trust with a new leader. Here I am, a new high school pastor, jump in. I'm like, hey, I'm going to be here forever. Yay. And then a week later, I'm like, I think I'm going to leave. I resigned 6 months later. And it hurt those students. They'd begun to trust me. They began to open up to me. And it was painful. I didn't want to do it. And I look back on the whole season. I'm like, was it a regret leaving or going or everything? Like, what? God, what did we do? He still saved some kids and did some beautiful stuff. But then we use that as an excuse. It's all good. And it's just like, I look back on that season. I'm just like, oh, God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry because it hurt people. It hurt my friend who hired me. At that church specifically, they had 2 awful moral failures. We had decided we're going to move to San Diego to help plant the Restored Church down there. We had decided. And before I made the announcement, there were 2 ugly moral failures with pastors there. And now I'm going to be like, I didn't do any of that stuff, but I'm still a pastor leaving. It was a mess. And it hurt people. When we force things to happen, we hurt people. Think about it in your workplace, right? I mean, especially, I was thinking of like sales. Those of you who do sales. Maybe the end of the quarter is coming and you have a quota. What do you begin to do? You have a temptation not to see people. You're not thinking about, how can I serve this person with my product? You're going, how can I get someone to take this and pay me for it? They're a means to an end. When you're stuck on a project, you can begin lying, cutting corners. Why? Because people don't matter anymore. Ultimately, what Sarai and Hagar and Abram are doing are, we can't trust God to provide, so we'll provide for ourselves. We have to provide for ourselves. And that was when Sarah was there, it was like, oh, this is scary. We got to figure out that we took it primarily because it was a job that paid. God's going to provide. I'm sure he is, but we got to just do this thing, even though it's probably not right. So we begin to force things. We end up hurting people. We do this all the time. And it doesn't end there. It also ends in the reality we add unnecessary suffering to our own lives. Look at verse 6, or 4 and 5, excuse me. Abram slept with Hagar, and she became pregnant. When she saw that she was pregnant, her mistress became contemptible to her. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for my suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and when she saw that she was pregnant, I became contemptible to her. May the Lord judge between me and you." When I'm reading the story, here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing Abram and Sarai. They go, you know what? We have a great plan. Now, this is interesting. Do you know that we humans didn't have much of an idea how babies were created until like the late 1800s? They knew how, but not like the real hows. They had an idea, obviously, but not like the real male sperm, fertilized female egg. I don't know much more beyond that. But we finally, like that wasn't a thing until like the late 1800s, early 1900s, okay? Now here's why this is fascinating. Because previous to that, most people had an idea that a male sperm had something to do with it. Jay, I heard your laugh. It's good to see you. San Diego, restored. They had an idea that male sperm had something to do with it, but they didn't understand the woman's side of it. They generally thought the woman's womb just served as like a home. Like they didn't understand DNA or genetics or anything like that. So it was kind of like it was basically the man's sperm was the baby, And then any woman would do. She's the home that incubates the child. That was a general consensus. And that's what all of us would believe without scientists, right? So that was kind of the main thing. So this is Abram and Sarai's view. They're like, wait a second. God said we're going to have babies. Let's do it this way. Well, they create this plan, which is a horrific, sinful plan, but they create a plan. We'll take our slave, we'll impregnate her, and then this baby will be ours, and we'll fast track the whole thing. And then what happens? It doesn't work out the way they thought. Hagar gets pregnant. But what does Hagar begin to do with her new baby growing in the womb? She's like, I'm awesome. God's blessed me. God hasn't blessed you. She begins mocking to whatever degree, feeling contemptible toward her. She sees her as a small woman. She looks down on her, and she begins to feel powerful. I mean, in that culture, babies were everything to a woman. I mean, it was your identity, it was your significance, it was your future. And so for Hagar not to have a baby and Sarai doesn't, Sarai's angry. How often do we create the perfect plan and then it backfires? We're like, okay, if I do this and this, then all my problems are solved. And you do this and this, and you forgot about factors A, B, C, and D. This is the mess they're in. And again, Sarai now blames Abram and then blames God and blames Hagar and blames everybody else. This is what we do in suffering. This is what we do in pain and sin. We just blame other people. But we create unnecessary suffering for ourselves. Now, please hear me. Suffering is a reality for everyone. It just is. But unnecessary suffering isn't. It's unnecessary. How many of us can look back on our lives and go, yeah, some of this suffering, out of my control. Didn't do anything, not my fault, period. But many of us can look back on decisions and choices we made and go, my life is significantly harder because I did that. And it's because we didn't trust God. It's because we didn't obey Him. It's because we didn't wait on Him. We do this often. This is why this passage serves as like a warning to us. It's saying, hey, future you don't have to be like this. If you trust and obey and wait on the Lord now, you don't have to hurt people. You don't have to experience unnecessary suffering. It's hard in the waiting. It's a type of suffering. They're suffering. But now they're going to suffer in a different way for a longer time. There's been unfaithfulness in the marriage. There's been abuse and using. There's so many things that you can trace history through Ishmael's lineage. I mean, these decisions are massive. And we do this often where we create unnecessary suffering for ourselves. I think of debt, right? When we spend a ton of money that we don't have, that's the future me problem. But then the future you, it's awful. And now you feel enslaved to the creditors. I think about addictions like pornography or alcohol or drugs, where we're not saying yes to Jesus, or we're not seeking the help that we need in the midst of those struggles. We're just like, I'm just going to do this now. It adds unnecessary suffering into our lives. Selfishness, just when we go, man, I'm going to make everything about me. What does it do? It damages relationships. It creates vast loneliness for the future you. There are so many things that we do constantly that we create pain for ourselves. I even think of like stewarding our physical bodies, right? Can you steward your physical body perfectly and still get cancer and die young? Yeah. It's a broken world we live in. It's devastating. But like my philosophy professor, who's like, man, if I would have just done A, B, and C, I wouldn't have this much pain. If I just would eat better, exercise, and get my sleep, I don't have to deal with this unnecessary suffering. I have to trust God that I'm a human being who has limits. I hate sleeping 8 hours a night. I hate it, but I do it. Why? Because I'm a human being, and I went through a season where I thought I was a robot. I was convinced I only needed 3 to 4 hours of sleep. You know how long that worked for? About 2 months. Until one morning, I woke up at 4 a.m. after going to bed around midnight, went to use the restroom and shower to get on with my day, and blacked out and fell and broke the toilet. My wife thought I was dead. Why? Because I'm not trusting God. God's like, Brad, you're not a robot. You're not a machine. You're a dependent creature who needs 8 hours of sleep. And I had to deal with the consequences of that. Your body will eventually rob you of what you want when we don't operate in the limits that God has given us. And so we're constantly in this battle of, okay, do I trust God? Do I obey God? Now, here's the thing. I remember being a senior in high school. I went to private Christian school from kindergarten to 12th grade. Weekly chapels, I haven't done the math. It's a lot that I've listened to, where a preacher got up, gave a message every week in chapel. There's like 3 or 4 that I remember out of many, many years. But I remember one my senior year. This guy got up, and he basically said, hey kids, here's an astonishing reality. God's commands are for your joy. Now, I had been in school, church, Christianity bubble my entire life. I'm sure maybe somebody had said that. I had never heard that. I remember being a senior and going like, what? Like my view of God's commands was literally to rob us of joy. I remember I wasn't saved. I didn't become a Christian until I was 20 years old, but I was like Christian-ish in high school. I thought I was a Christian. I just didn't know Jesus. It's a complicated story. But I remember sitting with some of my friends my senior year and seeing some of my, so I wouldn't do the shady stuff that the non-Christians did, but I wasn't joyful in Jesus. I didn't know him at all, so it's quite interesting. But I remember talking with some of my Christian-ish friends, and I was like, man, I wish we could do the things they do, but we're Christian. That was my mentality all growing up. It was like, it sucks being a Christian because they get to have all the fun, and we just sit here and are told, no, no, no. And here gets a preacher, senior year of high school, goes, it's for your joy and it's for your good. All the commands. And I was like, nah, that can't be right. And yet, the longer I've walked with Jesus, like, my life is best when I'm obeying and trusting Jesus. Like, is there still suffering? Are there still challenges? Yes, that's not an option. Your life's going to be hard. Do you want it to be harder? Then don't trust and obey Jesus. I don't know how else to say it. Like if you want to add unnecessary suffering to your life, don't listen to what Jesus says about sexuality. Don't listen to what he says about money and generosity. Don't listen to him and what he says about self-control, contentment, unnecessary suffering. So how do we get the courage? How do we trust him when it feels so hard in a world that's constantly going, no, he's not trustworthy. He's not trustworthy. Here's what I love. Hagar, her encounter with Yahweh, God, the angel of the Lord says to her, you're going to have a son, I'm going to bless you, and his name is going to be Ishmael. What does Ishmael mean? God hears. And a few verses later, Hagar says, have I seen the God who sees me? How do I trust in the God who I don't see and I don't hear very often? I trust him because he's the God who sees me and he's the God who hears me every moment of my day. And that's not just some spiritual mumbo jumbo of, oh, it's nice to have, a big brother in the sky looking at me. Guys, how many of your problems are fueled by the reality that you don't feel seen and heard? Is that not one of the deepest human pains? I don't feel seen, I don't feel heard. And the God of the universe goes, I see you. I hear you. I'm Hagar, you're in the wilderness. I'm for you. He see this encounter with God gives her the courage to go back to a horrific circumstance. Now, God does not always call people back to horrible circumstances. Sometimes he says, run and get out of there. This instance, he says, go back, and I'm going to bless you. A few years ago, it's coming up on the 3-year anniversary, I had the most life-changing experience with Jesus. I talk about it often, so I won't share the whole thing, but I was It was at a Restored Family of Churches retreat, and Jesus met with me in, just the most powerful way ever. And the big part of the story is this. I was going through a really hard season of ministry where I felt really misunderstood. I felt like I was burning out. Jesus in his grace, through a bunch of different things, just said over me, do you have any idea how much I like you? I felt seen in that moment in a way I've never been seen. Did it change my circumstances? No, not at all. I wish he came, he's like, I'm going to change everything. I'm like, yes. He didn't change anything. What he changed was, he goes, you're not alone. No one else sees you. I do. And I'm with you and I'm for you. And he's not saying Brad's awesome, he's perfect, he did everything right. That's by no means the point. As our creator, this is dangerous. Did Hagar do everything perfectly in the story? She's a victim of sexual exploitation, okay? So horrific. But she's mocking Sarai as well, so it's not like she was blameless in all of it. I hope you understand what I'm saying. God doesn't come to her and go, how dare you mock Sarai? Here's what's crazy. Genesis chapter 12, God says to Abram, anyone who curses you, I will curse. What does Hagar do? She curses Sarai, and God blesses her. He sees her in the wilderness. He pursues her. He loves her. He draws her close. Friends, if you can grasp this, that this isn't just up in the clouds, that our God did not just see and hear from heaven. He came to earth in the human form of Jesus Christ, who took on real eyes to see and ears to hear. On the cross in John 19, as Jesus Christ is being crucified, being tortured, and enduring the judgment that you and I deserve, John 19, John says, and then Jesus saw Mary. In the midst of his agony, he sees his mom and he sees his beloved disciple, John. If I'm tortured and being killed, I'm not seeing anything but myself. God, in his grace, in the midst of his deepest agony, Jesus Christ sees Mary and knows that she's about to become basically a single mom, single, alone, in a culture that's not very good. And he says to Mary, Mary, this is your son, John. John, this is your mother, Mary. In his agony, he sees us. He sees us. He loves us. He's for us. Let this passage, it's weighty, it's heavy. But man, can I beg you to feel the weightiness of it? To whatever you're wrestling through right now, maybe you're in the thick of it. You just need to repent and confess. But if you're like at the beginning of what could be death and destruction 2 years later, but you don't want to look that far ahead, can this passage warn you, it's not going to go well for you if you don't trust him and obey him. Walk with the God who sees you and hears you. He's for your joy. He's for your good. Let's pray. Holy Spirit, help us. If you counted all our iniquities, who could stand? Jesus, we thank you that you are in the business of redemption. Like you can take our messed up, sinful pasts and make us new and transform our future. Thank you. Thank you that there's not a single person here that's too far gone. You could use Abram and Sarai. You can use us. And you don't use us in a way that harms us. You use us in a way that blesses us. Lord, please God, I beg you for those right here, right now, who have not trusted you, have not obeyed you. They're scared, they're nervous, they're hesitant, whatever it is, Jesus. That today would be the day of salvation. They go, okay, Jesus, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to follow you. I know it's not going to make everything perfect and rosy and amazing, but I look back on how things have gone with me as king, and it's not working. Will we trust in you, Jesus? Will we follow you all the days of our life? Will we repent and turn back to you when we stray and sin? Thank you for these negative stories that give us a healthy amount of fear. Lord, would there not be a single person in this room who thinks they're above any of this? Like, oh, I could never do that. I could never do that. We are all capable. Help us, Jesus. We love you. We thank you for your mercy. We thank you that you see us. We thank you that you hear us. You're the King who died for our sins. You've risen from the dead, and one day you are returning. We thank you, Jesus. We love you. It's in your beautiful name. Amen.